everyone, Steve from Backcountry Gallery here, and this time around we're going to take an in-depth look at teleconverters. Not just what they do, but how they work, how to get the best results, how they affect AF speed and accuracy, the best way to use them, and a lot more. Even if you think you know all about teleconverters, there's probably something new for you in this video. First though, I want to invite you to sign up for my free email newsletter. That way you'll never miss any of my articles, videos, news, or workshop opportunities. Also, make sure you click the little bell icon if you happen to be watching this on YouTube so you're alerted each time I upload a new video. Okay, let's tackle these teleconverters. First, let's go over the absolute basics and then move on to more advanced / fun stuff. Teleconverters 101. So what exactly is a teleconverter, or TC for short, and what does it do? Well, it's basically a secondary lens that you mount between your primary lens and the camera. Once in place, it increases the focal length of the lens by the teleconverter's multiplication factor. However, it also results in a smaller effective f-stop in the process. Since the strict definition often leaves people kind of scratching their heads a little, let's take a look at a few examples. First, we'll look at the 1.4 TC, probably the most common. A 1.4 TC will multiply your lens's focal length by a factor of 1.4, but you also lose a stop of light in the process. For example, if you have a 300 f4 lens, the focal length is increased to 420 millimeter, but in the process you lose one stop of light. So instead of having f4 as your maximum aperture, you drop down one stop to f5.6. This slide shows what happens to a few of the more common focal lengths when you add a 1.4 teleconverter. Of course, there's more to life than just 1.4 TCs. Many manufacturers also offer 1.7 and even more commonly 2x TCs. The 1.7 TCs multiply the lens's focal length by a factor of, you guessed it, 1.7 and drop the effective wide open f-stop by 1.5 stops. The 2x doubles the effective focal length, but in the process, it demands 2 stops of light. Once again, here are some common focal lengths and the resulting f-stop and focal length with a 1.7 or 2x TC added. Feel free to pause if you need a moment to take it all in. By the way, people often wonder how a TC affects depth of field. After all, if you put a 2x converter on, say, a 400mm 2.8 lens, you end up with an 800mm f5.6 lens, but does it have the depth of field of an 800mm f2.8 since you started at 2.8? And the answer is nope, it sure doesn't. So for our example, when you add a 2x TC to your 400 2.8, the lens acts exactly like an 800 5.6, depth of field and all, and the same applies to any other lens and TC combo. However, a drop in your wide open f-stop isn't the only downside of using a teleconverter. You often lose a touch of image quality in the process too. Image quality. TCs are great when you need a boost in focal length. However, there is an image quality penalty to be paid as well. The extent of this image quality drop depends on the lens and the TC in use. To understand why image quality drops, it helps to understand just how the TC is magnifying the image from the primary lens. Basically, the way a TC works is that it grabs the central part of the image circle, discarding the rest and enlarging that central area to cover the entire imaging sensor. So you can imagine that the smaller the area the TC uses and the more it has to stretch it out, the lower the image quality is going to be. That's why 1.4 TCs see less image degradation than, say, 2x converters. They don't have to stretch things out as much. This also means that the better the optic in front of the teleconverter, the better the output from the TC. The higher quality the lens, the better the central area of the image circle tolerates getting stretched out like that. In addition, I've also found teleconverters tend to yield better quality with prime lenses than they do with most zoom lenses. Not all, some higher quality zooms do just fine. The upshot? Well, for me, it means I typically stick with a 1.4 TC. When attached to a high quality prime, the optical quality difference is minor to nearly imperceptible. However, as you go into the higher magnification of a 1.7 or 2x TC, the quality difference is more apparent. Plus, I don't enjoy losing that 1.5 or 2 stops of light, but I can usually handle the 1 stop demanded by the 1.4 TC. Still, you may find a 1.7 or 2x TC works well for your needs, especially on fast, high-performance glass. AF performance. Another place where you can take a hit when using a TC is in the autofocus department. First, adding a TC almost always slows AF down at least a little. Obviously, the 1.4 TC sees the least impact and the 2X converters see the most. Still, in almost every case, adding any TC is going to slow things down to a lesser or greater extent. In some cases, the hit is minor, like when you add a 1.4 TC to a fast 2.8 lens. However, when adding a TC drops your effective maximum f-stop down to 5.6 or smaller, the AF performance drop is often very noticeable. Not only do things slow down, but on most DSLRs, if you drop past f5.6, focus can become much more difficult and/or the number of AF points you can use actually decreases. In fact, many older cameras simply can't focus reliably beyond f5.6 at all. For example, maybe when you add a TC and drop past f5.6, some of your cross-type AF sensors revert to line sensors. You see that a lot when you add a 1.7 TC to an f4 lens. Now let's say you add a different TC and you drop to f8. Maybe at that point only a few AF sensors continue to function reliably, and usually those are kind of centered towards the middle of the frame. Now, what works and what doesn't varies wildly by camera and brand, so I can't really cover specific models here. So my goal here is just to make you aware of it. As a very general rule though, when adding a TC and ending up at a smaller maximum opening than say f5.6, it's best to stick towards the center AF points for the best results. TC and minimum focus distance. Okay, that's enough bad news for right now about TCs. Let's take a look at a positive benefit of using that teleconverter. One great thing about TCs is that they do not affect the minimum focus distance of your lens. For example, one trick I, and I know many others, like to do is use a TC with the Nikon 300PF. The 300PF has a minimum focus distance of only 1.45 meters. That's just under 5 feet. However, adding a TC doesn't affect this. So when I use my 1.4 TC with that lens, I get a 420 millimeter lens that still focuses down to 1.45 meters, putting its close-up magnification within spitting distance of a macro lens. Oh, and speaking of macro lenses, you can actually add a 1.4 TC to the Nikon 105 macro for either a greater working distance or magnification beyond 1:1. This is also amazingly handy when you're at minimum focus distance with a small subject that's just not quite filling the frame. Adding a TC allows increased magnification without changing the minimum focus distance. Truth be told, this is one of my main reasons for using a TC. Watch your f-stop when removing TCs. Sometimes, at least with Nikon and when shooting wide open, you may discover that when you remove the TC, the f-stop sometimes drops back to your maximum wide open aperture of the lens. Other times it stays at the f-stop that was a result of adding the TC. For example, maybe you have an f4 lens attached, shooting wide open, and then add a 1.4 TC, dropping the max f-stop to 5.6. After you're done with it, you remove the TC, but discover that sometimes it doesn't go back to its wide open setting of f4 and instead stays at f5.6. However, other times it seems to randomly go back to f4. What the heck's going on? It's actually pretty simple. The reason your f-stop doesn't always revert back to your original wide open value is that at some point while you were shooting the TC, you move the f-stop dial. When you don't touch it, the camera knows you want to go back to the last wide open value you were using before you added the TC, f4 in this case. But when you move it, even if you do it by accident, like you brushed against the dial, the camera sticks with whatever f-stop value is displayed there on the screen, even if it's still wide open with the TC attached. So the bottom line is to double check your f-stop whenever you remove the TC to make sure it's still where you want it. Getting the best results. To wrap this up, let's talk about some tips for getting the best results with your TC. First, keep in mind that when you add a teleconverter, the increase in lens focal length makes the lens behave exactly as a lens of that focal length normally would. This means that if you're hand holding, the speed that you use for the lens without the TC is probably not going to be fast enough for the lens with the TC. So you'll want to do some testing, and you'll probably want to raise your shutter speed a bit if you want to continue to hand hold your lens after adding a teleconverter. Next, I recommend using high-quality teleconverters. I recommend using the ones from your lens manufacturer, especially if that happens to be the same manufacturer that produced your camera. I personally use Nikon TCs and get great results. Sure, they're pricey, but they're still a heck of a lot cheaper than buying a new telephoto lens. By the way, you'll also probably discover that if you want to use the manufacturer's TCs, that they won't work with every lens, and that's by design. Most TCs are tuned to work best with longer glass, and in many cases it's not physically possible to mount them on anything else. In fact, I have a couple of links on my site that will take you to pages from both Nikon and Canon that list lens and TC compatibility. Some third-party TCs will work with lenses that aren't on this list, but you got to be careful. If the manufacturer thought you could get acceptable results with a particular lens and TC, and it was, physically possible to actually mount them together, it likely would have made them compatible. Most of the time, forcing a lens to work with a third-party TC doesn't really give you the best results. Speaking of getting the best results, let's discuss calibration and AF fine-tuning. If you use AF fine-tune or any other form of lens calibration, you need to calibrate your lens and lens plus TC combo separately. The TC adds another layer of variance, and the camera treats the combo as a completely different lens. So make sure that if you do any kind of lens calibration, you do it with and without the TC for each of your compatible optics. Finally, and this is the big one, I want to talk about when I use a TC. Many people use them to try to bring a subject that's impossibly far away a little bit closer. In my experience, if you still have to do a heavy crop with a TC attached, there's a good chance you're going to be disappointed. In my experience, I find that the best way to use a TC is to help finish filling the frame. Basically, when you're in a situation where the shot in the viewfinder is good, but you need just a little more magnification to finish framing the subject the way you want, that's the best way to leverage a TC. Field tips. For the last part of our video, I want to mention a few field tips, a few tricks and tips for using your teleconverter in the field. And I want to start with speed. One of the problems we see in our workshops all the time is people just have a hard time dealing with teleconverters and getting them on their lens quickly and that. And a lot of times they hesitate to use them because of that. And we don't want that. If you want to be out there using a teleconverter, you want to be able to get it on your lens as quickly as possible. There's two tricks for that. The first is not to use caps. If you notice, my 1.4 TC here has no caps on it. So what does that mean? How do I protect it? Well, I have a little pouch that stays right on my belt at all times, and I keep the teleconverter in that pouch. The pouch itself is called a Running Buddy XL Buddy Pouch or something like that. I'll put the exact name on the video, and I'll give you a link on my website on the blog post for this particular video. You can go ahead and click that. They sell them at Amazon. But basically, it's just a little cell phone pouch that can attach to your belt. Works really, really well, and it does not scratch the teleconverter. I've not had any problems with it. I've been using it for a while now. But what it does allow is it allows me to stick this into the pouch, and I never have to use caps. I'm not messing with caps because caps, I see them slow people way down all the time. So skip the caps if you can. Next part of using this pouch, though, is the way you put the teleconverter in it. You want to put it with the mount for the camera side of it. You want to put that towards your body. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in there. And you're going to see why we're going to do that in just a second, because part two is how do we mount a teleconverter quickly to our camera. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so I have my camera here, and what I'm about to show you is for Nikon, obviously, but it'll work, I'm sure, with Sony or Canon. You're just going to have to kind of modify what you're going to see here. But since I have Nikon, I'm going to show you how to do that. So what I do is I'm going to go ahead and take this off for right now and just set it aside. And what I do is I grab my teleconverter out of my pouch, and when I pull it out, if you notice, the part that mounts the camera is already facing the camera. That's why I have the lens mount towards my body and not towards the outside. This makes it a little bit quicker. Just, little things like that save time. The next part is I get the lens release lever right here, and I put my index finger on it. And what you want to do here is have it so the ridges are pointed towards the palm of your hand. That way you don't even have to look at it. If you have this backwards, you'll know immediately. It's like, oh, the ridges are going the wrong way. I have to flip that around. So you don't even have to actually look at it to know that you have it correct. Next part is we're going to take this and we're just going to rotate it towards the bottom of the lens mount like so. This will help match up our index dots and lines right here so that we can very quickly mount that to our lens. I see people all the time on my workshops and in the field trying to mount a teleconverter, and they're like, is it this dot or is it this line? This saves you a ton of time. Grab this, bring it down, and you're instantly on there. In fact, you can actually do this without even looking at the camera after you practice it a little while. I can literally grab this out of my pouch and just put it on, and I'm just looking at I didn't even look at that to do it, and boom, it's right on there. So once you have the teleconverter on, of course, what do? Just mount the lens to it. and you're all set. Of course, taking it apart can be just as quick. We're just going to take our lens off, dismount the teleconverter, again keeping this part towards our body, drop it in our little pouch, secure it, take our lens, mount it back on, and we're there. Most of the time I can do this in 8 seconds or less. So very, very quick. I highly recommend you do it. Just get that muscle memory down so that when you grab it, you know instantly where that little release is supposed to be. On Nikons, it's towards the bottom. I'm sure on Canon and Sony's, it's probably like towards the top or something, but I'm sure you can manage it. One more thing I want to talk about, and I believe this probably applies to Canon and Sony, but I don't know for sure. It might just be a Nikon thing. But Nikon has a little rubber seal here on the part of the teleconverter that mounts to the lens. And I found over the years that sometimes if you're in a hurry to mount that lens on there, you can kind of catch part of the mount on this rubber seal, and sometimes it can twist a little as you're mounting the lens to the teleconverter. So my advice here is to be very careful when you're mounting your lens to your teleconverter, and if you ever feel any unusual resistance, stop what you're doing, take that lens off, make sure that this is completely flat and up against there. Sometimes if you see it crunch down a little bit, just kind of get it with your finger. You can fix it really easy, and then go ahead and mount again. Now I know that's a lot of information on TCs, but if you like comprehensive information and tips like these, you'll love my ebooks, Secrets to Exposure and Metering for Nikon, Secrets to the Nikon Autofocus System, and Secrets to Stunning Wildlife Photography. All are jam-packed with tons of tips and tricks just like this. Also, remember to sign up for that free email newsletter on my site, and it'd be great if you subscribe to my YouTube channel as well. Oh, and remember to click that little bell so you get a notification every time I post a new video. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.